So we are live.
Okay.
And now I'm going just to publish it in social media.
So one more question, Emanuel. A technical question. Could you please tell me where is the button to share the screen of mine?
It's here in the middle, share screen.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. Just
okay. So all right. So we are live at the Center for Asian Studies YouTube channel. Today we have this special guest today. For the first time we are having a live session in English. All the other sessions we had were in Portuguese and Spanish as well. Today we have Lyu Dongye from the International College of Football International College of Tongji University in China. It's a great pleasure for us from the Center for Asian Studies at the University of Aveiro to have Lyu with us today. It's an honor to have someone from China, from the Tongji University talking to us and borrowing some of his knowledge on Chinese football. Usually I have published on our YouTube channel some videos about Chinese football, Chinese sports, Olympic sports, ping pong diplomacy, and so on. But this is the very first time we have the opportunity to listen to a Chinese researcher on the topic of sports, and particularly in football. So what we are going to have today is I'm going to present the Chinese football development plan in general lines. And then I'm going to pass the ball to Lyu to talk about the naturalization process of some football players that in the last year and a half that played for the Chinese national team. One of Liu's subjects of research is the naturalization process. So this is the topic he's going to approach today to share with us. I have prepared a presentation on PowerPoint just about the Chinese football plan. And like I usually say, sport is an excellent instrument for political, geopolitical, sociological, anthropological analysis. And for this reason, in this presentation, what I'm going to do is use sports, particularly football, lenses to understand socialism with Chinese characteristics. So the project has a reason, the centrality of the state and its capacity to generate the chain of productive sectors, and also to understand how the football plan help us to see how state planning operates through public policies in China. So I'm just generally talk about public policy. I'm not going to talk about the definition of public policy, as Berkeley has already taught. It's not worth walking here in a play on words that adds little to understanding of this thing. The important things for the present context is to bear in mind that public policy refers, as Passon says, to what is public and its problem. So identifying the problem is a starting point for formulating any public policy, so to the policy making. And as SEC states, public policy is the directive formulated to face a public problem. And what is the problem? According to SEC, the problem is a discrepancy between reality and what is understood to be possible, a possible ideal, what would be the ideal. In other words, a public problem is a difference between what public reality is and what they would like it to be. And as we will see later, both the football plan was formulated based on the identification of problems to be faced. So we have this policy-making cycle, the problem, the identification of the problem, the agenda setting, the formulation, the implementation, and the evaluation of the implementation of the public policies. In China, we have what we can call the formulation and implementation of public policies with Chinese characters. The first factor we need to take into account when thinking about public policies in China is planning, the state planning. After all, as Juan says, there is no way to question whether planning still exists, only what kind of planning China currently applies, because a lot of people, especially in the West and in the westernized countries, talk about, particularly after the opening up and reforms in the 80s in China, talked about the end of state planning in China with the adoption of market system. But this is not correct to say that we don't have in China, that in China doesn't have state planning. This is because the planning system evolved along with the economic transition. However, and it's essential to understand that, as Heilman and Melton points out, planning remained central to almost all domains of public policy formulation in political institutions that fostered the accelerated economic growth in China. According to Heilman, the most visible features of development planning remained the 5-year plans. And for Hu Engang, 5-year plans are one of the 3 fundamental approaches to the government macro-regulation, including self-adjustment and self-reform in the course of innovation in the socialist market economy. And I like always to remember, the 5-year plans are one of the most visible legacies of the times of Soviet support to China, to Chinese communists. Chabad claims that the Soviet inspiration in Chinese state planning was not only reflected in the structural model, but also in the planning itself, and above all, the established goals. I always make a point of remembering that this influence preceded the very foundation of the People's Republic of China in October 1st, 1949. That's because between 1931 and 1937, the Chinese communists established the Soviet Republic of Chinese Soviet Republic, exercising the experience of power in regions whose size and population were equivalent to medium-sized countries in Europe, like, for example, Portugal. So the autonomy of this republic was such that it even issued its own currency. As we can see in the image here with the Lenin picture, the camera. So this is important for us to understand because it's an essential feature of Chinese public policy to this day. A characteristic that was reflected in the football plan recently with the adaptations and regulations promoted between the end of 2020 and 2021. And I'm referring to Chinese Communist Party's flexibility and adaptability to changes. Once again, contrary to what Western propaganda would have leads people to believe, policies in China are not monolithic, and the Chinese Communist Party does not rule itself monocratically. Public policies in the People's Republic of China find their roots in what Heilman calls guerrilla-style policymaking. It's a fruit of 3 decades of revolutionary process. So the public policies in China are an open process, flexible, adaptable. This is a characteristic of the Chinese Communist Party and also of the Chinese public policies. And the Chinese Communist Party, through its history of 100 years that they celebrated this year in 2021, needed to be more flexible, adaptable to changes, reflected in this, of course, reflecting the formulation of public policies, the policy making. As a non-closed, not rigid process, with goals that only serves as a guide and guidance, and whose dynamics are markedly determined by conflicts of interest, recurring interactions, and ongoing feedback. It is important to note that the process of socialist transition in China is, of course, marked by contradictions. After all, let us remember that socialism is a step from overcoming capitalism to reaching communism. Furthermore, contrary to what some idealists think, not even socialism was born or is born ready-made and finished the day after the triumph of revolution. So this characteristic of dialectical constructions allows a constant adaptation to the conjunctural changes and justify adjustments throughout its implementation. Then we have another feature of the policy making in China, very characteristic to China. It is what I have called centralized decentralization. And someone might be there wondering, how can something decentralized be centralized? So economic reforms gave way to decentralized and local reform initiatives. These experiments characterize a peculiarity of Chinese policymaking, as these innovative measures usually take place before national legislation. As such, it is in constant state of flux. Approved action plans are subject to change, and the state action corridors can be modified. It's worth remembering that even the so-called Marxist socialism, whose origins were in the end of the 70s, in the beginning of the 80s, especially in 1984, only became a policy of the Central Chinese state in 1992. Until then, many of the policies were experimental and applied at regional or provincial levels. However, while much of the implementation of public policies in China is decentralized, including with the active participation of private sector, something has remained unchanged, and this is important. The centralization of decisions is still in the hands of the state. After all, as Gabriel and Schettino point out, in China, the state is endowed with a high degree of direct and indirect control of the means of production, and therefore the social reflections of production are different from those prevalent in capitalism. So I'm going to talk football, I promised. But before that, I need to talk about one more point that is essential for us to understand Chinese public policies. Also because it's something that is directly linked to the football plan and has some implications that we have seen in the last year. And I refer to the medium and long-term plans. So and what I want to point out is a change of the term to the term of planning in Chinese. First from Jihua and now Guihua. And this difference, as Juan emphasized, is important to understand the shift, because according to Juan, Jihua and Guihua have slightly different connotations. Guihua conveys the idea of something broader and long-term than Jihua, thus highlighting this aspect of contemporary planning. And according to Heilman, this differentiation is important because understanding the connotation of planning as Guihua allows us to understand the medium and long-term development plans, such as the football development plan. Well, I said earlier that identifying the problem to be solved is the kickoff for setting the agenda and consequently formulating a public policy, the public policy making. In the case of football plan, the question why now and not before, for example, is exactly the same as asking what is the problem or the problems identified by the Chinese authorities that led them to formulate this policy. In addition to the obvious problem that is the weakness of the Chinese male national football team, there are a number of factors, and here what we mean by problem is understood exactly by the factors that is identified. So the difference between the reality and what it wants to be the reality. That can explain why the football plan was released in 2016 and not before. And let's just say that it's not just because Chinese President Xi Jinping is a football fan. The reality is that China aims to have the largest sports industry in the world by 2035. And by 2035, the sports industry is expected to represent around 5% of Chinese GDP. And football was identified as one of the sports to be developed in order to boost the development of the sports industry. More than that, football was appointed as a driving force behind this development plan of the sports industry. For this reason, in 2014, the Chinese State Council published the opinions on accelerating the development of sports industry and promoting sports consumption, and in which it pointed to the need to formulate a medium and long-term plan for football. In 2015, we had the overall reform plan to boost the development of football in China, a 50-point document, among which it pointed to the need for football development at all levels, not just the top level. Then, in 2016, came the China's medium and long-term football development plan, a plan that runs until 2050, and it's not coincident that will coexist, so to speak, with 7 5-year plans. And 2049, we are going to have the centenary of the People's Republic of China. And this plan raised the development of football to the level of national interest. And the football plan, the planification for the sports industry development as all, help us to understand some important dimensions in Chinese governance, in particular to understand why through the football plan it's possible to see how socialism with Chinese characters manifests itself, in particular the role of the plan for the realization of the Chinese dream, which is related to the common prosperity and the community with a shared future for mankind. And the Chinese football plan is related to all that. Here we see some numbers related to the development of Chinese sports industry. It's noteworthy that there is also a focus on encouraging the practice of sports as a way to promote health and well-being. On the other hand, on the one hand, because of the concern with the physical fitness of the population, especially the younger ones, but also because promoting physical activities also generate a consumption of products related to these practices. And at this point, it also relates to football, the idea of creating the football consumption. So as we can see, it was expected by 2021 that the sports industry to represent $460 billion, and this was reached at the end of 2019. By 2025, it's expected to have a sector that produces $813 billion. And like I already mentioned, the goal is that by 2035, it will reach close to 5% of the Chinese GDP. Currently, this sector accounts for 1.14%. And for that, the implementation of football plan is under the responsibility of a body created exclusively for this purpose. It's the State Council's Office of the Interministerial Joint Conference on Football Reform and Development. That includes 11 ministries, 4 state councils commissions, 5 government agencies, the publicity department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, local and regional governments, agencies, commissions, and also bodies. As we can see in this image, all the organization level and also the Chinese institutions that are responsible for the Chinese football plan. In general lines, the plan is divided in 3 phases. By 2020, what was the goal. It was to have 20,000 specialized football school, 7,000 football fields, 30 to 50 million primary and secondary school students practice football. And according to Wang Dengfeng, the director in charge of football at the Ministry of Education of China, by the end of 2020, we have 30,000 specialized schools with 30 million football students, and also 60,000 football fields have been built or renovated. And then we see that they have goals by 2030, and then by 2050, that's the end of the football plan. When I talked about public policies with Chinese characters, I referred to what I have called centralized decentralization. This characteristic also applies to the case of football plan. In the case of football plan, the document highlights the role of the provincial and municipal governments and even non-governmental partners. In other words, from the central leadership who expose the great vision and set the goals, there is a necessary decentralization of competences with delegations of responsibilities so that the policies are operationalized and implemented. In relation to the sphere of government, power at provincial or municipal level, we can find several football plans at local and provincial level. Provinces generally issue a medium and long-term football development plan, while seats at the municipal, provincial, and county levels issue a document called the General Program for Football Reform and Development. When I spoke about the formulation and implementation of public policies, I explained that even when it comes to policy making, the centralized policy making by the state, it does not imply that there is no participation of non-state agents in the implementation. In the Chinese case, this is very common, particularly in the case of the development of football industry. We see an active participation of the private sector. The football plan, for example, states that the Chinese central government will lead innovative reform and development, and will be responsible for showing that football plays a leading role in the development and reform of sport in China. In the opinions for accelerating the development of sports industry and the consumption, there is a mention of active participation of the private sector. While in the general reform plan to boost football development in China, in its ideological guide section, we have mentioned the influence in the orientation of Deng Xiaoping's theory, that is market socialism, while the football plan refers to Xi Jinping's comprehensive for aberrations. Furthermore, we find both in the opinions and in the general reform plan expressions and formulations whose foundations are found in theoretical conception and practice of Chinese socialism, such as reform and innovation, further simplify administration and decentralization, strengthen market supervision, create a market environment with competitive and equal participation, improve the market mechanism, cultivate multi-market entities, attract shared capital, promoting interaction between the sports industry and industry, promoting the integration of the sports industry with other industry, and achieving the coordinated development of sports industry and economy and society. The football plan, on the other hand, brings that the necessity of creating an environment for the development of equal participation and fair competition, in addition to development of openness, increasing the level of internal and external opening up. Considering the market mechanism, the service of concepts of social the construction of socialism, it's noteworthy that the general reform plan states that for its implementation, there will be a combination of national system and market mechanism, using the superiority of the socialist system. In other words, private initiatives taken advantage of to achieve the intended development goals, but the state holds the domain over the strategic means of the economy. And the issue of domain over strategic means is fundamental for the characterization of this system. After all, as Professor Lyu Dongye puts it, in China there are different modes of production in the coexistence of different social structures and formations. Therefore, the important thing is to identify which mode of production is dominant and which class and or political force has control of objectively strategic factors. All of this fits perfectly into the long dialectical process that is socialism with Chinese characteristics. However, contrary to some people believe, especially in the West, in the westernized countries, this process did not start with Deng Xiaoping. It is true that with Deng was responsible for the reforms and opening ups in China that became known for using market mechanisms to develop the productive force of China in Chinese economy. However, we must not forget that Mao in the 40s and the 50s spoke about the need to submit the bourgeoisie and the development of the capitalist mode of production to the socialist transition, the construction of socialist society in China. By the way, but we just remember that the Chinese flag has 5 stars. The biggest one represents the Communist Party, and the 4 smaller stars symbolize the union of the Chinese people, the working class, the peasants, the petit bourgeois, and also the capitalists of national order, the national capitalists. In other words, the bourgeoisie is represented in the national flag, subjected to the centrality of the political and economic power of the state, and particularly the transition to socialism. As Mao himself has written in 1949, that to contain imperialistic oppression and raise its backward economic to a higher level, China must utilize all the factors of urban and rural capitalism that are beneficial and not harmful to the national economy and the livelihood of the people. And we must join the national bourgeoisie in the common struggle. Even more, Mao said that the Chinese policy in 1949 would be to regulate capitalism, not to destroy it. Mao, of course, always made it clear that the national bourgeoisie cannot be the leader of the revolution, nor should have the main role in state power. On different occasions, in 1957, and we are talking about 9 years of the People's Republic of China already, Mao takes up this question again, when he explains, for example, that on the economic plan, there would be the coexistence of different forms of property, but reaffirming that the Communist Party would exercise political leadership, or recognizing what he called dual character of the national bourgeoisie. Again, we are not talking about Mao Zedong, not Deng Xiaoping, and we are talking about 1957, so 9 years of the People's Republic of China. Deng, for his part, Deng Xiaoping, who is portrayed by many in the West as a reformist and even a capitalist, has never lost sight of socialism. In 1985, for example, he asserted that the main task in the socialist spirit is to develop the productive forces and gradually improve people's material and cultural life. That socialism means eliminating poverty, for example. In 1987, Deng reaffirmed the superiority of socialism over capitalism, drawing attention to the fundamental development of the productive force to thus provide the material basis for communism, adding that socialism itself is the first stage of communism, and in China, they were, in 1987, according to Deng Xiaoping, still in the primary stage of socialism. China still is in the primary stage of socialism. So let's remember, we are talking about Deng Xiaoping, not Mao Zedong or Xi Jinping. So it's wrong when especially in the West, they try to portray Xi Jinping leadership, for example, as a return to a supposed socialist roots. We see that a lot in the Western media, as if, because the idea behind that is that it's like at some point China had abandoned its path towards socialism, like with Deng Xiaoping, that there was no socialism anymore. That this is not true, as we could say through some examples of some passages of even the Deng Xiaoping. And this find roots with Marxism-Leninism, about the idea of the necessity to develop the productive forces. I'm not going to quote, but Marx, Engels, Lenin, and even Gramsci all talked about the necessary and sufficient conditions to start the process and development, and so on. So, I mentioned that in China, the domain over the strategic means of the economy is held by the state. In China, there is a centrality of political and economic power by the state. And how does this apply to the football plan? Well, we can see some examples here. Let's remember in 2017, Peng Gongsheng, head of the State Foreign Exchange Administration, made the following statement. Chinese firms bought lots of football clubs overseas. If these purchases help improve the standard of Chinese football, then I think that's a good thing. But is that what's really happening? A lot of Chinese companies already have high levels of debt and then borrow another large sum to make overseas purchases. Others pretend to be investing, but are actually just moving their assets out of country. What happened back then? For example, when the Suning Group bought Inter Milan in Italy in 2017, it was considered irrational. That what we just saw at the beginning of 2021, what happened to Suning Group. In 2017, the Wanda Group that had 20% of the shares of Atletico Madrid sold 17% of its shares and bought Dalian Yifan from the Chinese Super League. And in 2017, also Li Yonghong tried to buy AC Milan, and what happened was that he couldn't find finance in the Chinese banks, so he turned to a United States vulture investment fund called Elliott Group to have the borrow to buy the AC Milan. And what happened? In 2 years, he had to give the club away to the vulture investment fund because he couldn't pay back the money he borrowed. Also in 2017, the General Administration of Sport accused the clubs of burning money in paying very high salaries to foreign players. And it's in Portuguese here, and also manifested the intention to limit the spending of clubs because they were burning money. And what happened was some rules were changed from January to June in 2017. The rules was changed, for example, from the 3+1 rule, 3 foreigners plus 1 agent per game, to only 3 foreigners in each match, regardless of nationality. In May, there was a determination to line up at least 1 Chinese under-23 player, and in June, a fee of 100% of the value of international transfers above 5.9 million euros was implemented. And this rate was reverted to financing training centers. For example, Diego Costa and Wayne Rooney didn't go to China because of this change of the rule. Also, more recently, we had the salary cap in China in 2020, 2021, that a foreign player can only earn up to 3 million euros annually, and a Chinese player up to 728,000 euros. And club cheats cannot exceed 75 million euros, with only 10 million for foreigners. And also the change of the club names, attempting to create an organic relationship, something that was determined by the football plan and was reiterated in December 2019, the CFA action plan. Another point that I like to highlight is that the Chinese football dream is also the Chinese dream. Like the football plan brings in the text, that football plan also connects the revitalization and development of football with the construction of a powerful sports nation, the promotion of social development, and the realization of the Chinese dream. I won't have time to talk about the Chinese dream and common prosperity and the community if a shared future for humankind or humanity deeply here because of the time. I just recently uploaded 3 videos at our channel. It's in Portuguese, but if you don't speak Portuguese, we have the options of the subtitles in the YouTube. So where we approach more deeply all these 3 topics. But I just want to mention that the Chinese dream of great rejuvenation of the nation means transforming China into a prosperous and strong country, achieving the revitalization of the Chinese nation and increasing the quality of life of the Chinese people. And increasing the Chinese life, the quality of the Chinese people means that the Chinese dream will only come true and become a reality if the country is able to achieve common prosperity, which very briefly means a moderately prosperous society in all respects, in a society in which all people share the fruits of development, a society where no individual, region, or ethnic group is left behind, and a society that promotes the integral development of all. And the Chinese dream is not an isolated goal of the world, it's not isolated from the world. On the contrary, the Chinese have been taking and talking for a long time about the need for a common development, the guarantee of benefits for the Chinese people and for all the people around the world. This is the root of the concept of community of shared future for mankind. And this is also related to the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence developed by Zhou Enlai back in the 60s. And we see the concept of community of shared future for mankind applied in practice in different contexts. For example, the Belt and Road Initiative. And the Belt and Road Initiative we also see related to sports and sport diplomacy, like the relation with China with the United Arab Emirates, for example, if China Media Capital acquiring 13% of the City Football Group that controls Manchester City and a lot of other clubs. And in February 2019, bought a club in Sichuan in China, for example. Or also the stadium diplomacy, particularly in that case in Pakistan, the construction and China giving 2 stadiums to Pakistan. It's related to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the China-Pakistan Railway that is going from China to Gwadar Port, a port that's very important to this, the Belt and Road Initiative Maritime Road. Also the football tournaments that are held in China and also in other countries in Asia that has the Belt and Road Initiative as a slogan. Also, for example, Fosun that bought Wolverhampton in the West Midlands in England, and that Fosun was the first private company allowed to run and to build and run a high-speed railway in China. And Fosun is interested in being the company in charge of the high-speed 2, the second high-speed railway in England. So here we are also talking about the power elite and football opening doors. Like I said, all of this connected to the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which leads us to sports diplomacy. That is the last part of this presentation. In sports diplomacy is when international sports is consciously used by governments as an instrument of diplomacy. In the field of foreign policy, sport is applied as a part of its diplomacy, a process in which states represent, communicate, and realize the cultural values and interests. We have, for example, the slogan of the Winter Olympic Games in 2022 that's going to be held by Beijing, that is together for a shared future, for example. Or even the football plan that brings, excuse me, that expressed, for example, there is a significant increase in international football activities becoming an important part of sports diplomacy. It talks about cooperation, exchanges of talent, exchange channels, international exchange activities in football, and so on. then we have sports, particularly football in bilateral diplomatic documents, for example, with Brazil, with Portugal, with Russia, with Italy, with Spain, and with Argentina, for example. And finally, we have the social innovation challenge in China, that is to create a new cultural habit, that's to play football. We have the state as the main driver of innovation through planning, so state as the creative destruction driver. For example, with the construction of football academies, constructions or renovation of football fields, encourages investments in youth level categories and modern training centers, for example, and the goal to have one football field for every 10,000 inhabitants until 2030. The biggest football academy in the world is Guangzhou in China. And this leads us to what Lyu is going to talk about now, the necessity today, because to create this new habit, this new cultural habit, is going to take some generations to happen. And so this leads us to the necessity of the Chinese to have some naturalized players now at this moment. So thank you all, and I'm going to pass the ball to Lyu.
All right, okay, impressive presentation, Emanuel.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Right. So very interesting topic from Emanuel, and thanks for the invitation from him. And today I would like to talk a little bit about the issues, as you can see, the athletes naturalization in Chinese football. And also it's an interesting topic, consists of my recent research result. First, to me, I'm working as a personal investigator at International College of Football, Tongji University. We have several research centers, and we have students, postgraduates, undergraduates, etc. Okay, so great. As you can see here, today our topic is about athletes naturalization, but in Chinese football case. And I'm gonna give this presentation in the following parts. First, a briefing of the history, and then I'm gonna go from the legal issues perspectives, and then it's a sports and nationalism in the context of Chinese football. And then I would like to discuss about the identity of naturalized athletes in Chinese football. So here we go. Before all, I would talk about the concept, the definition of the naturalization, in case that some of the participants won't understand that. Naturalization, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is a process or an act acquiring citizenship or adapting to an environment. And in the field of modern sports, in the discussion of naturalization, athletes naturalization mainly refers to the issue of the athlete's nationality conversion. So naturalization, the footballer's naturalization, is nothing new in this field. And as we all can see from the pictures on the screen, many traditionally strong national teams all benefited from their ethnic diversity. And many of them are naturalized players. You can see like the German team and the new European champion, Italia, and also the French team, all right? And what happened in Asia? In recent years, many Asian countries start to employ some naturalized players to represent for their national team. And the countries like Qatar, they won the recent Asian champions. And also like Philippines, they made some notable progress in the World Cup qualifiers, Asian qualifiers. So let's go back a little bit to the football athletes naturalization in China. And when did it started? And when did the idea come from? So let's say the idea of football athletes naturalization can be traced back to at the turn of the century. It's around like 2001 or even before that, 1990. What for? Because what? Because at that time, the Chinese neighbor geographically, Japan, made a great progress. By, of course, by many things, by their policies, by their their method to propelling the development of sports and football. But one thing very interesting is that they started to employ the naturalized players. And they did make impressive progress. And as you can see from the screen, this Sir Ramos, a former Brazilian player representing a Japanese national team, won the Asian champion title in the 1990s. And after that, many naturalized footballers were employed by Japanese national team, like Wagner, like Santos. But at that time, what happened? Because Chinese national team, the male national team, played not that bad at that time. At 2001, and the Chinese national team made to the World Cup, the 2002 Korean-Japan World Cup. And and this thing gave the Chinese audience, Chinese fans a strong confidence that we can do everything by ourselves. We don't have to, employ the overseas talents. We don't have to. So the call or the idea of introducing the overseas talents just vanished. And it was supposed to be a good start, entering the World Cup for the first time in 2002. But however, unfortunately, it is the first and also the last and the only time for Chinese male national team entering the World Cup. And now it's 2020. 21. So what happened in this 20 years? What happened? And many bad things happen, all right? And the things like the match fixing, like gambling in the professional league of Chinese football, undermined the development of this industry. And the continuously bad it is not difficult to understand the bad performance of Chinese national team because the whole system, including the youth training system, the system of the professional league, all destroyed. And you can see that it was always criticized in the media, in the internet, everywhere, that the Chinese football team did very bad. And according to a famous Chinese football practitioner whose name is Zhang Lu, and this bad influence even continues to nowadays. And a statistic very worth to mention is that he did an investigation at around 2018. The youth players, like professional or semi-professional Chinese youth players, the number is like around 10,000, from 10,000 to 20,000. And it's a relatively small number compared to the Chinese population. How many people we have? We have 1.4 billion people. And what about this number? This number for the kids, for the youth training players in Japan, and it's around like 50 times of what we have. And this is very, make me sad, and made every football practitioner sad. And so since 2010, the Chinese government decided to propel to accelerate the development of Chinese sports industry, especially in football. And since that time, the idea of introducing naturalized footballers in China was evoked again. For what? There are several reasons. First thing is the great success of the one Chinese CSL football club called Guangzhou Evergreen. And they won the CSL champion title in a row from 2011 to 2017. And plus, they won the AFC Champions League, the champion title, 2 times, 2013 and 2015. So what is the success model of Guangzhou Evergrande Club? They introduced the foreign talents from Brazil, from Europe, and plus they employ the top local players. And this kind of success mode made some Chinese people see maybe we can also use to employ this model in our national team to bring us to the World Cup. It's a dream of 1.4 billion people. And so what happened? Since 2015, a lot of policies, a lot of things, before the act, always the policy, a lot of politicians, senators even give the proposal to change the nationality law to facilitate the process of naturalized players to be listed in the Chinese national team. And there is a chronicle of major events of football naturalization in China. And on December 20th, 2018, the CFA confirmed for the first time that the naturalization will be actively promoted. And then what happened? The boy, what we call the Mister in green, the Hou Yongyong, or we better call it John Ho Setter, the former Norwegian midfielder, was the first naturalized footballers under the policy of football athletes naturalization in China. And Nico Yanalis, he was the first players listed and also played for the Chinese national team. And Dennis Elkson is former Brazilian player. He scored the first goal of naturalized footballers for Chinese national team. So for the moment, we have this list of naturalized football players of China. Some of them have the eligibility. What is eligibility? I'm going to talk about later. And this is the general information. And for sure, we really did something really international. And from Europe, from Africa, from America, we introduced many talented overseas players. So one thing very interesting, let's see, what is football? So when we are talking about football, are we really talking about a game that 22 people chasing a ball? Is that only that game? Of course not. Of course not. Because when we are talking football, we are talking something more than that. Of course, the ball game. Something more than that, we're talking about the relationship between fan and club, sociologically. We're talking about the stakeholders. We're talking about the sponsors. We're talking about the emotion of audience and many things beyond the sport itself. So athlete naturalization is quite interesting topic, and I believe that many things can be studied around this topic. For example, like from the historical perspective, like Emanuel did, did it from the globalization, from the intercultural communication, or we can go further in the societal perspective. We go for the public perception. We go for societal social identity, many things. And here, firstly, I would like to talk a little bit from the legal issues perspective. All right. And firstly, like always, about the concepts. What is the nationality and citizenship? You can see here, the nationality means the status of belonging to a particular nation. And citizenship means the position or status of being a citizen of a particular country. So the former one is more like an ethnic concept, and the latter one is more like a legal concept. But in this case, in this context, the acquisition of Chinese citizenship is only related to nationality. All right. So another thing that I would like to mention, very interesting, is that a person has nationality of a certain country can represent a certain country in the international competition. Is that right? Of course not. Nationality is different from the sports nationality. And here we give the definition of the sports nationality, and it is considered as a qualification to participate in international sport events on behalf of a certain country. And in football context, and the closest explanation is, of course, we enter the system of FIFA, the Federation, International Federation of Football, and it's the eligibility to play for representative teams. And what happened? What happened? And when did the regulation of the eligibility arrange or come from? It's like the man here, many people must know him. If you are a football fan, Alfredo Di Stefano, a famous player, a legend himself, represented many famous clubs, Real Madrid, River Plate. And what is really interesting that some people don't know is that he did represent 3 countries in the international team competitions: Argentina, Spain, and Colombia. So generally, the FIFA was created to organize the competition, the matches between the associate members. And in most cases, like the matches between countries. So the nationality swapping is not a priority in this context. So in 1962, the FIFA Congress regulated nationality swapping by introducing the relevant policies. And the first edition is quite simple. You just kick the ball to the nation, to the country, and to let it be limited by the nationality law of the country. And after 2 or 3, if I'm not wrong, it's two times of emendation. This one is at around 2003. And it came to the new version, the latest version. And they gave a lot of detailed rules for eligibility to play for representative teams, because in recent years, many increasing, let's say, increasing number of the cases of the naturalized players want to switch their eligibility. So generally, the FIFA respect the granting rules, its blood relationship within 3 generations, and also the residencies. Generally, is 5 years continuously living, and also the principle of the place of birth. That's the way for the FIFA to define if you have the eligibility to play for a certain country. Okay, so let's give an example. In this context, in Chinese football naturalization. And Elkson, how did he got employed by Chinese national team? And oh, sorry for that. I didn't change the language of that that naturalization pathway. All right, it's generally several pathways. And for Elkson, in his case, he did represent his original association, the Brazilian Association for competitions, but with exception of international A-level exceptions competition. All right, and then at the time he represented Brazil, he did not have the new nationality, Chinese nationality. No. And the last time he represent the Brazil Association, he didn't complete his 21. And the last one, he continuously lived in the Chinese territory for 5 years. And that is the pathway for him to be approved by the FIFA representing Chinese national team. Okay, so next part, I would like to go from the society perspective, talk a little bit about firstly the sports and the nationalism in China, and then I would like to discuss the identity of naturalized football players in China. All right, so what is nationalism? And you can see the definition here, and Anthony Smith once gave the 2 important, let's say, principles of the nationalism: the belonging, emotion, or consciousness of the nation. And it is not difficult to understand. There is a strong emotional link between the, let's say, the national team performance and the citizens. All right. So in Chinese case, so what is the nationalism in China? In long ago, let's say in ancient China, there is something like the nationalism, like the Huaxia Center, and based on the patriarchal clan. But what we are talking about here is based on the modern state concept. It's modern nationalism, all right? It's in modern China. When did it start? It started from the 1848, the Optimum War, bring China into this war, because before China is really closed, and made China become a semi-colonial society. And after that, after the period of the Republic of China era, and then to the new China era, and during this time, the nationalism in China, what we are talking about here, is step-by-step formed. And since the Mao era, the role of sports in shaping citizens' nationalism has continued to strengthen. And sports played an important part in terms of shaping the Chinese people's national consciousness and facilitating the rise of a new country. So, and many scholars said that it became an essential part of a strategy which are taken by the Chinese, let's say, government or politicians to achieve the national salvation and revival. So we can see the picture here is a ping pong diplomacy. and it was between the two big countries, China and the United States, and employing ping pong as a tool to deal with the relationship, getting closer at that time. And this picture is the PRC's first Olympic gold medals, and the athlete is Xu Haifeng. And at that time, he was kind of like described like a hero in the citizens, because what? Because sports nationalism emerging as a powerful ideology in Chinese politics was manifested as a special form of overcoming subordination, showing China's response to the block of the Western world. And this case always, before happened in some communist countries. And the sports and athletes and the national esteem are strongly related, strongly connected. And plus, sports mega events like the Olympic Games also pose effects on the vocation of nationalism, building the strong spiritual bonds and emotional belonging for Chinese people. So that's why we can see that and in China, the Chinese people just show care about the performance of the national team, and because it had historical reasons, strongly related links. And then I would like to talk about the identity of naturalized footballers in China, and what is identity here. And it is defined as a characteristics, feelings, or beliefs that make people feel different from others. And the scholar Ted Phil gave his theory about his social identity from the social psychology perspective. So, and based on that, many different theories developed, like the group identity theory and many things. And here, let's say group identity sports is an important way to build various social identities, of course, including the nationalism, including the national esteem, national pride, and sometimes it also caused problems. It was sometimes criticized, especially in the bad performance of national team, in the bad period of national team. That of course the solidarity is one of the most important factors towards the victory. So sometimes the multi-ethnic factor was criticized as a negative point for the bad performance of the national team. It happened in the French team, also the German team. So for the naturalized players, they really need some time to get involved in this team, or let's say bigger, get involved in this country. And the Golden once gave his theory that cultural integration and adaptation are regarded as the indispensable elements in the process of minority ethnic groups integrating into mainstream society. So for them, they need really a relatively long time, especially for this grew up in the Western world and barely have the knowledge and experience in China before. They have to understand, how to learn many things about China, how to communicate, and how to, many barriers in terms of the culture. And the identity dilemmas, one famous case that like I just mentioned in the Mesut Ozil, and I'm a German when we win, but I'm an immigrant when we lose. Sometimes they just blame it, and it is sometimes not that friendly for non-ethnic players to involve in the group into the national team in this society. So for Chinese nationalized footballers, the first thing is that from the identity to the society, they have to recognize themselves as as Chinese. They have to get used to the culture. They have to communicate with their teammates, and it is reported that in the recent matches, the naturalized players like Luo Guofu, like Elkerson, they cannot speak Chinese. So the team provided them with the translators, and some of their teammates who had overseas experience, can translate for them. So in the Chinese national football team, they communicate language, when in many cases no Chinese. That's rare. You have to let every teammate to understand you. You have to have a good communication, and it's not easy. And another thing, from another side, from the society or group to the individual, does the society really accept the naturalized footballers to represent them, especially the non-ethnic footballers, wearing the Chinese jerseys, competing in the international competitions fields? And there's another problem, because the naturalization and the globalization, the change of the society takes time. And for one thing, China was a relatively closed society. From the reforming to till now, it's just like 40 years, and it really needed a long time to change. And also, for Chinese football, at the time, they really need some a strong effort. They need some A's, overseas A's, and how to bring these naturalized players, bring them into the real world to establish a good media image to the community of the football fans, is another issues that we need to concern. So here's we come to an end, and generally in my investigation, I put some kind of conclusion, but here I just want to make it short. Regardless of the success or failure of Chinese football naturalization, this act is a brave attempt. It reflects the country's determination to develop this sport. And if we look back to the history of the naturalization of football, we can understand the logic of the policymaker. They want to bring some good players, talented players, to stimulate the market, bring more economic resources, and bring the eyesight of the football fans back to the football field, and then finally to make a good cycle, a good industry of football. And however, as we said, this society is a whole thing, all right? And or change or modification to any part, and it's not like it's going to be like a dropping a stone in a calm lake. So the formulation, the reform of the football, and like many football policies, should not be like an isolated link, but it should be like a long-term and considered method So in the context of football, in the sports, the construction of an imaginary community requires both good storytelling and a strong performance. So I think it's going to be like a long-term process, and more efforts are needed in this case. So all right, it's my end of my presentation, and I will give back the ball to Emanuel. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Lyu, for your presentation. Very interesting and very important insights. I think that's that you brought here. It's very interesting that how football and sports in general, but football in particularly, that's the topic here today. How through football we can see the globalization process as well, and in a lot of aspects in the football industry and football market nowadays. But in that case of the naturalization process of players, also we can see how the globalization processes is reflected in this topic. And as you have shown, a lot of countries still have naturalized players, and in some cases the players are not only naturalized, but they are also descendants from some nationals, like for example the Moroccan team that played the 2018 World Cup. A lot of people, some of the players were born in France, other players were born in the Netherlands, but the parents were from Morocco that immigrated to France and to the Netherlands. And we have examples. You gave the example of Mesut Ozil, but we have also example in the French national team that won the World Cup. They have players that 1998 players that were descendants from people that immigrated to France, and that also helps us to understand how the process of the decolonization of the especially the African countries from the European countries. So and we have this culture exchange. And I would like to ask you something about particularly the Chinese public opinion on this process of naturalization of players. How the Chinese football fans see that process? What's the general opinion, the public opinion in China about that?
You know, as I mentioned, a lot of people, you know, they question this process, and many people hold the view that China is a big country with many population, and we could not find 11 footballers to compete for our nation, and that's ridiculous. But as I just told, it's not about the country's population. It's about the sports population. It's about the football population. We are a big country in terms of the whole population, but we are relatively small in the football population. It depends on how many youth, how many kids are playing football, are training professionally or semi-professionally in this country. The figure is so small. It's so small. So in that case, you know, many people after that, they started to understand. Some people understand that we have to develop the football, and the naturalization is some kind of like a strategy to bring more eyesight, to bring more economic resources, bring the attention back to this football field, and the finally destination is to have a good football industry. And then we can, of course, for sure, we have a better national team performance. And from what I saw, and the general idea of naturalized football players is, I think, is positive. It's positive because if you watch the match, you see the naturalized players like Eriksen, like the Luoguofu, the Aloisio, they played really hard. And at the meantime, the CFA, the Chinese Football Association, really did something in the media coverage area. They posted some influencing news, like the interview, post the photo like the players kiss the flags of China, just kiss it and put it in front of the news. This kind of media will absolutely affect the emotion of the public, of the audience. And I also read a paper used the content analysis method to analyze the general idea from the public towards the naturalized players, and generally is positive. Is positive.
That's interesting. Yeah, that what you mentioned about the sports population, the football population, is very important, because like I said in my presentation, there is this huge challenge in China, that is to create this habit of playing football. That is something that will take some generations to be acquired, and this is something that I think that needs to be understood, that football, because when we look to the European strongest national teams, and also the South American strongest national teams like Brazil, Argentina, and also Uruguay, and in Europe we have the English, Italian, German, Spanish, French, and the Netherlands, and from the last 20 years, Portugal as well. We have football has already more than 100 years consolidated in the local culture, with the sense of belonging and so on. And in China, it's something that it needs to still needs to be created, and this habit of playing football also. And then it's going to take some 2 or 3 generations to start to have this football population, so sports population that practice football, and to find the Chinese born talents. Of course, they already have some talents like Wu Lei, that's playing for Espanyol in the La Liga, but it's going to take some time. This is one point, that because the disillusion with the national team can be very harmful to the sports consumption, particularly the football consumption, and this creation of the fandom in China. But I think that that's in my opinion, this is my particular opinion. I think that this naturalization process is very important at this moment. Like you mentioned, in Japan was important in the end of the 80s and the beginnings of the 90s as well. And nowadays we have the Japanese national team among the strongest teams in Asia. And also other countries like Qatar, thinking about the next World Cup, that they started a naturalization process with Aspire Academy, attracting also talents from abroad, and so on. And so this is interesting, and your insight from China, talking about the public opinion, also is very important for us to have here, because we, of course, what we don't have so much access to what's the general opinion of the Chinese people and the Chinese football fans. So thank you for your insights in bringing us some of the knowledge from China about that subject.
My pleasure, Emanuel. My pleasure.
So I think we do you want to say something more? I think that we have covered a lot of subjects. I don't know if you want to share some thoughts.
All right. About the sports population, about the football population, I would like to mention another point, and is that some people once asked me that the Chinese kids, they don't really like play football. Is that so? The German people like, the German kid like, the British kid like, the Brazilian kid like play football, but Chinese kids, they don't. Is that so? Is that the truth? No, it's not that the truth. Like I just said, the society, the sports is in the society, and many things, they are strongly related, strongly linked. And how can we see this thing? How can we see this thing? And the Chinese case, they are putting on more burdens about the education. And since the primary school, the middle school, there is many homeworks, a lot of assignments, and different class after the school. I experienced it, and I also had the experience outside of China. I went to Europe and to Spain. I compared the things. Is that is a really important thing, because Chinese people, Chinese kids, they have no time, no after class time to play, to train something they really like. They are restricted by the educational system. But fortunately, in this year, the Chinese government just launched a new policy to cancel every after school class, and to forbid this kind of educational agency to give extra burden on the kids didn't complete his 18th. So I think in the future, more kids will have their free time to enjoy the football, enjoy the sports, enjoy some leisure time. And I think in this time, more talents will be showed, and they'll be fine, and they're gonna make the football talents pyramids of Chinese football, and then go to the top of the pyramid and help Chinese football getting better.
Yeah, this is interesting what you bring, because kids needs to play football, so you can find who has talent or not to evolve and to train. If they don't have the opportunity and they don't have the time to play football, even they don't have the place to play football, that's why the football plan brings the necessity to build and renovate football fields all around the country, because to have places for people also to play football, because especially in the urban areas, because we have in a lot of places, even in talking about Brazil, for example, we have even with the past of the years, we have less football fields for people to play football in our cities. And so creating also these spaces for people also to play football is important, and also giving kids, especially kids, time for them to also to play football is something important as well. And do you think that this is going to happen in the following years, or now with these changes in the system, with not having so much extra class activities, so giving more time for people in the youth to practice sports? Do you think that's something that's going to be to have more people playing football? Do you think that this is going to happen?
Yeah, I agree with that, and for sure, I think this policy gonna pose a positive effect in terms of having more football population, because like I just said, that China has a big population, right? 1.4 billion. So even a small part of the kids, they choose to train football, then we have a big base of football talents. And I also think that the physical education is a part of the education, because in the past and before, the physical education is shortly separated from the educational system in China. But now we are going to develop it to continue everything together, to make an individual, to make a kids to getting better from different sides. So like I think this change and this policy, this different thinking, this different idea will change the whole system, the whole system of Chinese education. And of course, for sure, they're going to bring more free time to Chinese kids, and we're going to have more kids like playing football, and we have more talents, of course.
Yeah, you've mentioned something that's very, very, very important. A key point, that is the physical education classes, and more time for physical education in the educational system in China, and particularly focusing on football classes in physical education. This is also another point that's also in the football plan. So it's very, very interesting as well. So. Well, I think that we have already more than 1.5 hour of our live session today. I think that we have covered a lot of tough topics, and I think that we can call off now. I would like to thank you, Lyu, for your time and for giving us the pleasure of having you talking about the Chinese football being in China, and bringing us the perspective of someone who researches football in China. It was very, very interesting and very important to our Center for Asian Studies, and to have your point of view and to bring what you've been researching. So thank you again for your time and your participation. I would just like to make one call here to remember people that we have the call for abstracts for the second international conference of the PSA Sport and Politics Group. It's going to be held here at the University of Aveiro in June 2022, 16 and 17, and we have keynote speakers Richard Giulianotti, Stace Pope, Flavio de Campos, and Pipo Russo as well. And we are the call for papers for abstracts are open until April the 10th, 2022. So I would like to invite who is watching this live session, if it's interested in football and sports in general. We have a broad theme topics talking about football that include politics of global sports, sport and identity, sports nationalism and transnationalism, and sports mega events, sports policy and governance, sport and race, sport and gender, sports business and sports sponsorship, sports law, media and sport, so and so on. It's not, so it's going to be a very interesting time here. So I would just like to remind and hope that Lyu can come to be with us here in Aveiro. You are going to be very welcome. Lyu.
For sure, my pleasure. I would like to be there, and thanks for the invitation, and also thanks for your time. And really, I like to be here in your channel, and love what we were talking about the football, about Chinese football, and I hope that in the future I still got the time to be invited here to talk with you.
Okay, Lyu, thank you again. So I'm going just to say goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.